Welcome back to Digital Doc Games, where we explore everything games and health. Today, we are continuing our discussion about What Remains of Edith Finch. If you missed it, make sure to go check it out. Go check out Dr. Matthew Tyler's review of What Remains of Edith Finch on youtube.com/digitaldocgames. If you like the channel, if you're here for the first time on Twitch, make sure you give that follow. If you're on YouTube, make sure you give that subscribe. If you're listening later on podcast, make sure you give that like and leave that 5-star review. I appreciate you guys so much for helping me grow this channel. It means the world to me. But without further ado, let me welcome my guest tonight. I'm so thrilled to have this discussion. First of all, I guess going in order of who's next to me, DocBrooke, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am so good. You know, it's so nice to see you. Well, I feel like I see you often because I love to go on your streams, but it's nice to see you and you get to see me as well.
Yes. Reciprocal seeing. It's
That's right.
nice.
That's right. And thank you for being here. And Matt, thanks so much. Matt, you're new to Digital Doc Games, I guess, by face. But
Yeah.
it's nice to put a face to the voice. Again, really thank you for the review. Just an incredible insight into a special game.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for the opportunity. And yeah, this is my face to go with the voice on the video. And I suppose this is my first time showing said face on Twitch as well. So
Hey, all right, breaking the
hi,
mold.
everyone. Yeah. Thanks
Well,
for everyone who's tuned in so far.
100%. You know, it's always exciting for me. Ooh, I went blurry. Come back. It's always exciting for me to like have more docs on the stream because that's something that I want to do more. And here we go. We got 3 right here, so we're doing pretty well. So, guys, tonight we're gonna talk a little bit about this game, What Remains of Edith Finch. And this is an old game. When did this come out? 2016?
2017, I think?
2017?
That's when it won a bunch of awards. So.
Okay. So yeah, probably 2017. This game kept coming up on Digital Doc Games. I think Brooke, you were maybe the first person who was like, you got to play this game. And then I had Zach on from Hey Listen Games, and he was like, you got to play this game. And then I played it, and it was amazing. And then I met Matt, and Matt had this wonderful review, and I'm like, you got to put this review up on Digital Doc Games. But it's probably been a while. I guess it's been a couple months for me. Brooke, when was the last time you actually played this game?
It was when I played it on stream, which the pandemic has just turned my concept of time into butter. I believe that was 3 months ago.
Okay.
3 months ago we played it on stream.
All right. I actually do remember. I think I tuned in for one of those. And was that your first time or you had played it before?
That was my first time. I had a lot of friends in the space who were like, you play games about social issues and storytelling and you haven't played this game yet, fix that. And so I played it on the stream. Yeah.
Right.
Here we are.
And Matt, when was the last time you played it?
I probably played it like around 6 months ago, and I'd been hearing about it, same as you, like off and on for a couple of years. Whenever it would like be on sale, I'd troll like the subreddit for Nintendo Switch game deals, and whenever that name popped up, everyone would just like gush about it, like how great it was. And they're like, don't ask what it is, just play it. And eventually I did. Yeah. They were right. It was a great experience.
Yeah. I mean, so would you say that's how you felt too, Brooke? I mean, after playing it, did it kind of live up to the hype that your friends were selling it as?
Oh, definitely. I've played a lot of walking simulator-ish. I hate that term because I think it's kind of demeaning, but that's technically the genre.
But you know what? The thing about walking simulators is like, I got into a Twitter conversation about it once, and then I started thinking of other genres in games. Like, there's a lot of, like, role-playing game doesn't really make sense anymore. Like, there's a lot of titles that kind of don't really work, and that's just what they are.
Yeah, I agree. The whole titling game, especially as we're seeing like convergences in genre, it's just not as helpful. But like storytelling, ambient storytelling, narratives, atmospheric story, whatever you want to call it, it definitely lived up to the hype for me. I was very moved at the end of this. I cried on stream. I think I've cried on stream 3 times since we started because I play emotional games, and this is one of the ones that got me.
So you're not counting when you intake especially spicy food and you cry from that.
Yeah, I'm not tears of being moved, not of pain.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I guess let's start with Matt. Could you recap again? If you haven't watched the review, go on YouTube on Digital Dot Games YouTube. Go check out the review. It's really great. Matt, give us a recap of your thoughts on the game, sort of from this perspective, of being a palliative medicine physician.
Yeah. Um, so for those who don't know what palliative medicine and palliative care is, we're specialist clinicians, and every doc kind of has like their part of the body they focus on. If you're not a generalist, and so I say that our part of the body is your quality of life, and so we're really all about helping you live the best life you can live when you've been diagnosed with a serious illness. And obviously, that's a super vague description because it means like a different thing for every different person that we meet. But we walk that line between living until we're dead, and what remains of Edith Finch was so cool for me because on first blush it's like a super morbid game. Like everyone in this family is just like getting like killed off left and right, and you're
Yeah.
like, holy shit, like this is dark. But when you dive into these characters and this dichotomy between Edith's mom and kind of her total fear of what's going on in the family, and her great great grandmother, who just sort of rolls with it, like this, like what seems like a horrible tragedy in the family, and she's just sort of like, all right, like she kind of takes these rooms and memorializes them and like keeps all their stuff in place and kind of keeps them alive, like
Hmm.
in this different way, even when their physical body is gone. And I just thought that was such a cool way of kind of living with death, and just sort of leading into how it's just this natural thing, and we're all gonna go one way or another. So like, just she kind of just, it is what it is to her, and I think that's
Right.
it's very beautiful despite sort of the morbid kind of overtones.
So like, is that something that was somewhat familiar to you as a coping mechanism? I mean, obviously, this is sort of brought to the extreme. You've one family member who is memorializing these rooms, one family member who's shutting the doors and running away from the house to get away from it. Like, it, was that familiar to you as far as kind of how you've seen people react to death and dying?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a whole spectrum when you're really staring down the barrel of your own mortality. There's this terrible misconception, I think we perpetuate it a lot in the medical world, that when you're given any sort of serious diagnosis that's going to be life limiting, we talk about the scale of grieving, and sort of going from um, denial to anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And there's just sort of this assumption that everyone's going to accept their diagnosis at some point, when that's kind of BS. That,
Right,
that
right.
doesn't, it things don't work that way in real life. People are far too complex and different to all follow these neat little progressions when you're given just life altering news, whatever it is. Um, so yeah, we see all the whole spectrum of reactions. Some people are just like Edith's great great grandmother, who are like, "Well, shit happens. Let's just, I mean, what do we do next?" And other people are just not there. They're not
Right.
there, and they're focused on something else.
And
And
that was like kind of what was
yeah,
cool for me playing through the game. And one of the reasons I love games is because you get to experience these different perspectives that you otherwise wouldn't. And with Edith, as you're walking through the house, if you are Edith walking through the house, I know there's some debate of maybe who you actually are playing as, but
mm,
yeah, I want to bring it up later. But
yeah,
when you're going through, you everything's so crazy seeming in the beginning. Like everyone's reactions, like the mom's reaction, the grandmother's reaction, like it all seems so out there. But then as you're going, like you kind of start to understand, at least for me, like their sides, which I thought was really powerful. I don't know, Brooke, did you have that experience or something different?
I think that was what was partially so striking to me, particularly because in a lot of these games, you spend a lot of time getting to know the perspective of one individual. And I thought was so like, and it's usually the voice that you're hearing. So like we're hearing Edith's voice, and I kind of get what I've heard some debate too. Are you Christopher, her son? Or are you Edith? Or who are you actually walking through the house as? But you're hearing Edith's voice, Edith Jr.'s voice the whole time. But I really love the way that through Edith, and then through the different sort of vignettes, and then through the way like Edie, her grandmother, appears in the different vignettes, and like how those different stories are told out, you actually get a really great sense for her mom and her great grandmother and all of these family members that she's never gotten to meet, and her brothers. And they do some really compelling character building with very minimal work, which is just really interesting to me.
And that's why, like, when I played this game, and then Brooke, I went back after this, which this was your recommendation, was to play Gone Home. In like comparison, like Gone Home was like the first like quote unquote walking simulator, I think. And I was really actually disappointed going back to Gone Home, because coming after Edith Finch, like it just seemed so much more empty. Like you still got a similar thing of hearing people's voices and living their memories and understanding their perspectives, but I don't know, I guess like the way it was done in What Remains of Edith Finch, it just ironically, like the house seemed so full of life. Like it was so like it was just, everything was so well designed, and I just felt like I was a part of it. Versus Gone Home, different environment, like you're in a house that's been totally deserted, so it should feel a little bit more empty. But yeah, Edith just, I think, resonated with me more in that way.
No, that makes total sense to me. I also wonder if some of that's intentional design on the game designer's part, based on what they're trying to execute as the overall point of their narratives. Because I would say you could argue that Edith Finch is actually supposed to be about the celebration of life, and how fragile life is. And I think, you know, to Matt's point too about Edie and this like preservation of life, and how everyone has to come to grief in different ways, and one of those ways is celebration, which I think is really strong in the game. Gone Home, I think, is trying to do something a bit different. They're doing a parody almost on the bury your gaze trope, which, this is a bit of a spoiler if you haven't played that game, but it is a game that is meant to make you feel as though it is a horror game. In a lot of ways, it has that kind of feeling of abandonment and isolation, and you never know what's going to happen, and you're always thinking something bad's going to happen, and it's not. And so different designs, but one of the things I think that makes Edith Finch a more, at the end of the day, I think, emotional game is because it's a celebration of life. You feel that grief almost even more when characters die.
In Edith.
Yeah. If I could add to that thought, what Edith Finch really reminds me of, as off the wall as it is the movie Coco.
Yes.
Oh my God, I'm ready for this. I love this.
Yeah. So I think they both kind of focus on this concept of immortality through remembrance, memory, and storytelling. For those who haven't seen Coco, it's a Pixar film kind of about Los Muertos and the family tradition of, we kind of remember our family, and we kind of keep their memories through photographs on the mantle, and that's how they stay alive in the afterlife. But there's this very, like, within the afterlife, there's this concept of a final death, where once the last living person forgets you, then your like afterlife echo also disappears. And what keeps them tethered to what keeps the bridge alive is the memory of that person. And I think Edith Finch sort of takes that same idea, but from a completely different angle. But I would have to agree with Brooke. I mean, it's all about celebrating life and preservation of memory, and just keeping everyone's story alive. And it can look morbid, depending on kind of your take on that, keeping this person's room alive who's died. It can feel sort of creepy
because a lot of people would say like that's not healthy, right? Like I think that would be like the gut reaction, is that's not healthy.
Yeah. And this is a big thing in the grieving process too, about this idea of you're supposed to move on after someone's death, and anyone who's lost someone close to them, someone they hold dear, knows that you don't move on. You move forward, like you learn to live in a new way,
right?
But things don't go back to normal after you lose someone. They just just don't.
Right.
So
Yeah,
until you've
that's so
experienced it, it's
interesting.
kind of hard to wrap your mind around.
For sure. And again, like what a video game I think can do is, like you said, like until you've experienced that, when you experience death, I think a story like this, a game like this, is going to hit on a totally different level, especially if maybe some of the stories are similar to you that you can kind of relate to. If you haven't
Mm-hmm.
experienced that yet, like this still supplies you with a look into what that might be like. Maybe you can't empathize 100%, but you get a little bit closer, which I think is really, again, I just like video games because they're cool. What do you guys think of? What do you guys think of the curse?
Brooke, do you want to tackle that first?
What do I think of the curse? As in, like, do I think it's real? Like, am I convinced by the end that something has befallen the Finch
Yeah, is
family?
it? Because I was surprised. So Matt kindly posted the link to our video review on Reddit. I guess the What Remains of Edith Finch Reddit, and there was some comments that I looked at before. It looks like there's
Oh
some.
no, you found
There's some die-hard people who are like really into like it's the house. Like the house
Yeah.
is what's causing this. Like they're really into the curse, which is fine, but wasn't necessarily my takeaway.
So my hot take.
Mm.
Please don't fill my comments or the comments of this video with mean things to our
What could be
to
mean
our
to
friend
Brooke?
Digital Talk. My hot take is it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If there's like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if there's a curse or there's not, because I think if you pay attention to a lot of folklore and history and storytelling, most curses that happen to characters are really self-fulfilling prophecies. They hear a prophecy early and then they kind of make it happen because they're living with this worry. So you never really know, was there actual like some sort of supernatural force causing this to happen, or is this what happens when you live with this kind of mindset, right?
Right.
It's like the great Scottish play problem or what have you. If you're told this is going to happen, do you make it happen?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of the tension in the story, because some of these characters, especially some of the as the generations continue and this continues, some of these things that happen are totally freak accidents, and some of these things that happen are people trying to prevent the freak accidents from happening.
Right.
So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, but it could be both. That's me.
What about you,
Yeah,
Matt?
I like you, Ami. I came across the Reddit conspiracy of like the house being this cursed demon, and I'm pretty sure it's like one dude on there perpetuating that who's like really committed to that narrative. Which power to you, bro.
Power to him.
I didn't realize like this was a thing, because my perception was there's a point in the game where Edith basically says something to Brooke's point, that we sort of gave the curse life through our obsession with it. And I think if anything, the curse is just the kind of the self-torture of thinking you can completely control your future and obsessing over what's going to happen in the future versus what's happening now, and just living your life in the best way that you can with the information that you have, and letting things just unfold however they're going to unfold.
You like have no idea. And that was what was powerful about Edith Jr. doing this whole practice of going through the house and writing all these things down for her unborn child, is she's giving him almost I mean, I guess you could see it both ways. I was going to say a positive thing, but she's giving him the knowledge that she didn't have, right? She didn't necessarily know these stories, but she's making sure that he has that. But I guess you could see it the other way, is like maybe she shouldn't do that. Maybe ignorance is bliss, and he should just go on living a life without knowing about his family's history. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think honestly that's why I'm assuming we're allowed to talk about the end of the game.
I feel like we already have. It's been years.
Yeah, it's been years. It's been years, internet. Don't get mad at me. I'm about to split it. That's why I think what got me so much at the end of the game, when you realize that it's Christopher reading the book and then leaving the flowers at her grave.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Because I think that gift of that knowledge is actually really important. I
Right.
am not from a background like I am not from a background where I have not had knowledge of my family, but I have lots of friends and loved ones who do have that experience. And the not knowing is really awful.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that she gives the gift to him, and then he has to make that choice eventually about like how that he's going to let the curse impact his own life or his own perspective on life is like really cool and very
Yeah.
moving.
Like it's not going to happen because it doesn't necessarily need to happen, but it would be so interesting to see a sequel of this game and like
Hmm.
to dive into that a little bit. Like what do you do with that information knowing that you're cursed, so to speak, right? So
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
and I'm curious if you guys had any similar thoughts. It's funny, like we all see this through our very like specific lens, right? Um, maybe because of the reason I was playing with was this game was already with the mindset that this was going to be some impactful, powerful, important story. But I 100% walked away just being like, oh, it's an allegory for mental health. Like that was totally I was totally convinced. Like it wasn't perfect. Like because I think there was it was ambiguous with the curse and everything. But it's like yeah, mental health and the genetic component of mental illness. And I mean you got into certainly with I forget the name of the brother, but you get into topics of suicide. Um, the Milton who lived underground. I mean, there was lots of even the kid who went around the swings. Like just lots of, in my opinions, displays of mental health, and that was really powerful for me.
Well, and I think you just used the word allegory, which I think is interesting in the sense that if you look at the curse as like depression or other things that we know varying degrees about how it transmits with family, but like with in my family, there is a long history of bipolar disorder and how even if one is not diagnosed with that, the impacts of being raised in a family with that there's a long ripple effect,
Yeah,
and I think the ripple effect of the curse as like a greater allegory for how mental health and some of those things impact, and then how we see it manifest in some of the family members really really differently or maybe more predominantly, like Lewis, who's the brother,
Lewis.
who deals with suicide. I think those are all like evidences pointing to what you're talking about. I agree.
I think that's truly the marker of a great story is that you can interpret it through so many different lenses and find meaning in it from kind of what you bring yourself to the experience, which I mean, I
Yeah,
think is really cool because I didn't get any vibes of mental health
really.
from my lens and from what I brought to the experience. Uh, I really do kind of think of it as an experience almost as much as it is a
Mm.
game. It kind of feels like the natural progression of a graphic novel almost. You sort of stepping into a story like through a video game on like a very like broad umbrella label, but much more of just experiencing someone else's story.
Man, it's so fascinating to me that you guys didn't necessarily see that the way I did. Because like for me, like this game, the hardest game I ever played on stream, but also maybe the hardest game I ever played was That Dragon Cancer, which I played
Mm.
a couple
Mm,
months ago. It's been on my list forever, right? How can I make a channel about games and health and not play That Dragon Cancer? Um,
mhm.
and
Yeah,
that game
yeah.
sucked. Like it was fantastic, but it sucked. Like I walked
Mm,
away just so upset after that game, which is, a very valid response to have. I would say
yeah.
right under that, as far at least games that I played on stream, what remains stuck with me for
Mm,
a good while, and probably still is stuck with me a little bit. I was like definitely disturbed by certain scenes. The
yeah.
one, and again, for me, was looking at it through like mental health, but the one that was really, really hard for me was the kid in the bath. I
Yeah,
I, I hated it.
Oh, yeah.
that's the
Yeah,
first time I
Yeah.
cried
yeah.
while playing that. Yeah.
But it was also beautiful because and again through the lens of like seeing it through a mental health game, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. This is there. I am seeing this kid's brain, and they even talked about it, that, you know, the dad, I think, was saying like how he knew his kid just saw the world in a different way and stuff like that. And like it gets to this interesting topic that, especially in games, I think is really interesting to explore, of like, we call it mental health illness,
Mm.
but sometimes, you know, what is bad about these things? What are the cons of these mental health illnesses? And maybe what are the pros? What is the pro to being bipolar? What is the pro to being schizophrenic, right? Um, at some point, obviously these things are harmful, right? Overall, but at some point, someone made the decision that, hey, this isn't normal. But in an alternate alternate timeline, maybe someone made a decision that, hey, if you're schizophrenic, like they're just different. Like that's just a total different thing. Um, so that's kind of where I went with that. I was like, oh, we're actually seeing inside the mind of somebody who's different. But yeah, when that ended, that was really hard for me. Any thoughts,
Yeah.
Matt, on that one?
There's a lot to unpack there, and I think having this, just I think on a broader lens, like this is an interesting commentary on tragedy, since these are all events, and tragedy is a meaning that we assign to an event, and that's kind of the angle I took from the story, rather than mental health specifically, but just how one works through like a tragedy and whatever that means for them. And even if we haven't lost someone close to us, we're all dealing with our own shit to some
Right.
degree. And and I think like the experiences you bring, like the kid in the bathtub. I mean, I would imagine those of us who have young kids,
Right.
or kids in general, like it's gonna hit a lot closer to home, or just hit in a different way than if you haven't had kids. And it's like it's sad regardless. I mean, that was a very hard scene to experience and then digest subsequently. But I mean, it's still just it's a thing that happened, and it's sort of what do you do with it to move forward from there?
Right.
Um, I think, so, talking about kind of mental health and kind of schizophrenia, and like how kind of seeing the world in a different way. I mean, I'm thinking about the parallels just to just disability in general, and this idea of any sort of disability really being a social construct more than anything. It's just how one functions in a world, and what society is willing to accommodate and what it's not really defines disability, not kind of the individual. But we're very quick to kind of call it something to kind of let us off the hook from needing to uh, build equitable things for everyone who lives here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Brooke. Did you want to?
Well, just the comment about equitable things is also something that I wanted to bring up just in our discussions, I think, about mental health. And I work with a lot of students who are part of like the neurodiverse community. And one of the things that comes up in my teaching, but has, I think, become increasingly more apparent the more we have these conversations, is that it's not like the framing, I think, about like it being illness
Right.
is something that doesn't account for the fact that at the end of the day, it's not that the person is inaccessible, it's that the world as it is in its normative state is inaccessible to that person. And so that's where, when people start making the push for like, what does accessibility look like, and I know that's become an increasing conversation in the game space as well, like how do we design games to be accessible, how do we make stories more accessible to people, how do we make platforms and things accessible. I think this game offers an interesting lens to the idea of like what valuable things can come from a person if you make the world more accessible to them.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah. And yeah, I think that is like, you're helping me frame kind of my thoughts of the game. But yeah, it was a very open-minded portrayal of these characters. Like it was a very like, even though again, like Edith and Dawn were sort of polar opposites, like maybe judgy in different ways of how they dealt with it. Like once you could see that, and through Edith Jr.'s point of view, it was very much like, yeah, like again, we've already talked about it, but oh, like it's not good or bad. This is just how it is. Like this is every person's individual. So yeah, I really appreciated that also.
And I think there's something to be said, and it's hard to square this with every single story in the game, but the fact that great grandma Edie lived the longest and was the most comfortable, or
Yeah,
seemingly most comfortable with the
interesting.
family dynamics, and the one that was accommodating of death and sort of, in a way, invited that into her life by kind of keeping those rooms alive and kind of building the house bigger and bigger to accommodate each story. I think there's something to be said for the fact that that seemed to be a very like healthy thing for her body's coping and kind of helped her live as long as she did, as opposed to Edith Junior's mom, who was just spent her life running from the thing. And I think they're kind of ambiguous about who died first, ultimately, but she
Mhm.
certainly did not live nearly as long as her grandmother.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Really interesting. So we talked about a couple of the different vignettes, the kid in the bath, Lewis. Did you guys have, it's kind of a weird way to frame it, but did you guys have a favorite vignette, or if not a favorite, like one that stuck with you the most? Do you have a favorite
Yeah.
story
Which
of
was your
someone dying
favorite
miserably?
gruesome death?
Yeah.
Most impactful.
Most
Let's go with most
impactful. Stick with
impactful,
the
maybe.
lingo here. Yeah.
Good reframe, Brooke. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I do. Um, hmm.
I think for me, while you guys think, I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I guess the most impactful for sure was the bath. But the other one that I just thought was so well done from so many different ways, but certainly a game design and a game mechanics way was Lewis and the
Mhm.
dreams that he was having all up until the horrible moment where gonna he's gonna kill himself.
Mhm.
But just like gameplay wise, for me, like how they started bleeding the screen more and more as the story went on with his fantasy world, and that was also relatable for me as like a kid that was always sort of and someone who's always just sort of dreaming and in class I always would just kind of like, okay, I'm bored, I'm gonna literally go to a fantasy land right now, and oh, I'm a
Mhm.
Jedi and like all this stuff. But to see that just overtaking his life, and then again back to that conversation of what is illness, what is not okay, what is okay for him, his and I think maybe they did this, the therapist I think was maybe narrating, or you're
Yeah.
looking through her journals, and
Mhm.
she said like he prefers to live in this life, and that's his happiness. Obviously it led to a horrible outcome, which is not good, but for that
Mhm.
moment, like that is how he lived. So I think that was probably my most impactful.
Yeah, and I'll just adding to that particular story, I thought it was such a beautiful appeal to the idea that we just don't know what's going on in other people's heads, no matter what we see on the surface there. And the analogy there for me was the patients I take care of who are on life support, on ventilators, and they're on sedatives, they're completely unresponsive, and it's really easy to just sort of walk in there and like do your exam and kind of just treat them as an object and
Mhm.
walk out. And I, I've been on the other side of this. I've been a family member at the bedside of someone in that situation, and the the people that would come in and actually talk to um, the person in the bed, regardless if they could talk back or not, like it just the impact that that had on feeling like safe and just that I'm actually gonna my loved one's gonna get care, magnitudes of difference.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And I make it a point to just talk to everyone.
right.
I'm gonna tell them like where they are, what day it is, like whether they can talk or not, because you don't know what's going on in someone's head. And I think again, you kind of take the lens of mental health, and that would I would concede that that is much more about mental health than that
Mhm.
particular vignette. But again, I think you can apply it to such a broader situation, just a general appeal to kindness to people in general, because we don't know what's going on in their heads.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
I love too that the therapist, like it was told from the therapist, like reading like the letter,
Right.
Mhm.
and just the empathic narrative that the therapist kind of gave to his mom, I thought was really well done too, and not just making him like a clinical problem, but an actual person.
Right. Right. Brooke, do you have one in mind?
Yeah. So it's hard because I think it depends on impactful why.
Right.
Um, because I think for me the story that stuck with me the most was Lewis's, and but it's for a lot of reasons you all have said. The other one that stuck with me the most is one of the more bizarre, but I think it also does a really nice job of illustrating what makes Edith Finch great as a game, which is they're experimenting with style. So Barbara's story, Barbara's the one who's eventually killed by her fans, but it's told in that sort of comic pulp fiction
Yeah.
horror slasher style. Um, and the visuals are so striking, and her narrative comes about midway through, so we've already had some sad things about some of the other like young boys and who have died in the family, and we get to hers and it's sort of bizarre and surreal, and it makes you as a player spend a lot of time being like, how reliable are these narratives now? um and some of those things, especially after you have sort of like a very bizarre first narrative with the
That's
first
Molly, right?
Molly, I think is
Yeah.
the first
So
Finch, where you're
bizarre. I
going
was like,
through all
what
the
is this
anamorphic
game? Yeah.
transformations. Yeah. So, but then you kind of go back into some grounded, and then this brings you some of the bizarre again. But it's still very sad, and so that was still really striking to me for all sorts of reasons because of the narrative departure. And then what I think works so effectively with this game is it does a lot of ebbs and flows. So you get some of these more lighthearted. I don't want to say lighthearted deaths, but surreal or bizarre scenarios, and then you'll get something
Heavy.
really
Right.
just like
Right.
gut punch, right? And it helps all of the stories land because they all feel distinctly different, even though in the end they are all about death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Building on that story too, to the point of tragedy being our own construct. I was like that story was hard because I'm very jumpy. Like I don't watch scary movies, and that was even pushing my ability to get through. And then again on surface level, you've got this. I think she's like what, late teens or early 20s or something to that nature.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't played the game, she was sort of a child actress. It was very like well known, and then kind of just faded to the background and was kind of a nobody after that.
Literally faded. Like the way they
Yeah.
portrayed it is actually what made her famous
Yeah.
was her scream, and she literally couldn't
Yeah.
scream anymore. So like literally faded.
Yeah. And then they portray this like kind of gruesome murder, and then the after shot was, well, she went out, like, because
The
they're reading
performance of
like
a
this
lifetime,
this
right?
story. Yeah, she kind of became a legend after that, and they made this comic book about her that the character reads in the game. She kind of became permanently famous after that, whereas she would have maybe just kind of completely faded from public knowledge otherwise. And
Right.
again, it's kind of what we call a tragedy and what we don't. This fact that she got to kind of be immortalized through this event.
Right.
You know, how do we? It's complicated how we frame that. It's hard to call that universally bad or universally good, obviously, because the murder. But
Yeah. Right. Just a few messages in the chat I just want to bring out. So first of all, CT Sinclair is here, and he when we were talking about that dragon cancer, he said go check out PalliMed's review of that dragon cancer. So PalliMed actually is this was a Digital Doc Games PalliMed collaboration. Matt had written his What Remains of Edith Finch review for PalliMed, which is a hospice and palliative care blog site, which is wonderful. And I like stumbled upon this website, really interesting, and I see they have video game reviews. I'm like, what is going on here? Which is how this all got started. So yeah, go check out that Dragon Cancer's review over there. Ginger Sheep, hey Sheep, how's it going? Says bedside manner, both to patients and their families, is absolutely critical to providing quality of care. Couldn't agree more, Sheep. And Big Papa 823 responds to Palliative and says. I think he's in response to bedside manner and even patients when they're on the ventilator, giving them care. Says it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the patient doesn't feel like they are alive anymore, they may not fight to continue living, which I thought was a really insightful and deep comment. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
The one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and I talked about it a little bit with Lewis's story, but I just want to like give the developers a pat on the back because it is not easy to make a game like this for so many reasons. It's not. I was just on a call today actually with some games for health people, and they were saying like, what do we do? How do we convince like the big publishers that a game about health is worth funding, right? And I said like, well, look, I mean, make it a good game, right? Like look at these games, Hellblade, What Remains, like a lot of these walking simulators. Look what they're already doing. And in my interview with the devs making the cost of recovery and the other one that I did, which was really interesting. Before I forget, a lot of these dev interviews that I've done, it's always so interesting. I guess they've all been for these walking simulator type games, and it is this challenge. They have to think like, what new mechanics can we, have someone do? Like, in that Dragon Cancer, you play on an arcade machine, like running as the kid, like all these like little creative things. And I thought that this game did a great job with that. So good job, developers.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think you're touching on an important thing too about the make a good game. You don't have to make a game particularly flashy to be impactful because, like in Edith Finch, you literally move and hit X to interact. That's it.
Yeah.
But they figured out visually how to build it out in such a way, and narratively, auditorially, to build it out in such a way that you do feel very engrossed in the story with very minimal input and design. And you mentioned before I forget, which we also played on stream, very similar.
Right.
You walk and you interact, and you sort of sometimes will redirect the pointer to interact with different things. But the quality of the narrative and the art is so beautiful that it kind of takes you through.
Yeah.
But that's all very difficult. I just programmed my first game ever for a game design class I'm in, and holy cannoli, even basic games are incredibly difficult. So kudos to the devs who pull that off, because that's really, really hard to do.
Yeah, 100%. Also, that style of game, just point and click, press X, it's a lot more accessible to so many more people. Matt, after watching the review we worked on together, my wife said she wanted to play this game, which is the best thing ever. Cause like we played like 2 games together and it's really hard to get her to play a game with me. So I'm so excited she wants to play it now. But that just speaks like,
I love it.
Like keep up this genre. Cause like it can pull more players in and show people who don't maybe normally play games like, hey, this is what a game can offer, So that's really cool.
And I think we're in a really cool time where the idea of what is a game is just expanding every year. Again, like we could have our own conversation about if this even qualifies as a game per se, but also it doesn't matter. Like it's an experience like anything else. And again, it's just another way of telling a story, which I think is really impactful. It carries a message.
So if you guys have any additional thoughts, feel free to share them as well. But I wanted to kind of close on this question of what recent games have you played that sort of have given you a similar kind of feel, right? Like what's the next? Where do we go from this? What do we do? What next game do we play to experience this type of impact?
I have an immediate answer. I'm happy to jump in, Brooke, if you
go for it.
I honest to God can't shut up about Spirit Fair. I know Christian already knows this. My poor friends and family have heard a lot about this game already. I can't stop talking about it. It's such a beautiful game that touches on a lot of the themes of Edith Finch in a completely different way. It's much more like Animal Crossing vibe, but with similar message about just how we treat each other, the stories that we tell, and the things we know and don't know about the people around us, and just overall emphasizing that we take care of each other and kind of live each day the best we can. Awesome. Fantastic game. It's a very zen vibe.
Is it? Because I haven't really figured it out.
The description is a cozy management game about dying. Okay. It's got vibes of Animal Crossing, a smidgen of Stardew Valley if you've played that. But you're basically you're on a boat and like these kind of animal spirits come aboard your boat and you build them houses and cook them food and kind of help them like tie up loose ends from their living their lives previously.
Hmm,
And
that's
you kind
cool.
of shuttle them to the gate of like the final afterlife.
And that's
But just very like
only
yeah,
on Switch, right?
Mm-mm.
it's every
It's
platform I
Oh,
on
is it
believe now. It's
really?
it's on
definitely on
PC as
Steam.
well.
Okay, cool.
Definitely on Steam and
Mhm.
Switch. I would imagine it's on Xbox as well. I haven't checked PlayStation.
Okay. Brooks
But
giving
yeah,
eyes.
Oh no, it's really good. I've played it on stream. We really enjoyed Spiritfarer. This house is a Spiritfarer stan house, so
Sweet.
that's a great recommendation. Two
nice.
two recommendations for
There you
Spiritfarer.
go.
There you go.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other one, you've already mentioned it, but I'll recommend it to anyone. If you're looking for a similar impact, would be Before I Forget. We just played it on the stream, I think about 2 months ago. I've cried 3 times on stream. And that was the other game that made me cry. That was not Kind Words.
Okay, so kind words, Before I Forget, and What Remains.
Kind Words, What Remains of Edith Finch, but then Before I Forget
Right,
also
right.
made me cry.
So
Similar
uh,
emotional impact.
those are 3 out of the 4 impact reviews on Digital.Game's YouTube right now. So I guess we're picking the right ones. It's right to Brooks'
Yeah.
emotional chord.
What makes Brooke cry in public? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Before I Forget is just a really lovely story, and I've been increasingly convinced that specifically devs who are working from Indian backgrounds have a lot of really interesting and nuanced work that they are doing in their storytelling space. Raji is another great narrative that's more based in sort of folklore and also religion than like maybe a more contemporary thing like Edith Finch, but also tries to deal with mental health and bodies and family relationships in really meaningful ways.
Yes.
And I'll plug that too, just because I think that's a growing trend we're seeing in games coming that aren't developed by Western developers per se. That I think they're
Yeah.
doing really great work, impactful work
And
there too.
that game just came out for the Switch and Xbox.
It did.
And PlayStation? I don't know if it came out for PlayStation. But go play that game. That's an awesome game. You can watch the review on Digital.Games, and then the developer interview I highly recommend. It's probably one of the most interesting interviews on the channel. Other than Brooks, right? Brooks was the best. I think for me,
Plugs.
this is a different one, and I haven't like totally formed the thought yet. But everyone in the Digital.Games Discord knows that I have not shut up about Returnal. I've been playing Returnal recently. And that also is a game that I actually do think is very impactful for multiple reasons. Probably the most obvious is what it teaches you. Kind of one of my favorite topics in games about failure and learning. I think is really interesting and growing. But it also does deal with death as a core mechanic of the game. And I'm still very early in the game, but you start to kind of think about, and Celine, I think that's her name, the main character, starts to think about like, what is death? What does it mean? She's interacting in some ways with like past versions of herself or past bodies when, because the whole thing is about dying and returning. So I think that's kind of an interesting one that is still forming for me, but I'm getting an impact for. So I want to note Returnal there.
Nice. Nice.
Awesome.
Other than that, I think that pretty much puts a good ribbon on What Remains of Edith Finch review discussion. Brooke, Matt, thank you so much. I didn't even know, like, this is something I hope to do a little bit more of, just these sort of discussions, book clubs, right? To kind of discuss these things because it's important. One of my things, maybe in a post-pandemic world, I think med students and residents, like, they should be playing these games. Like, I'd love to have a book club at a school to be able to sit down and have these conversations with people who are delivering care in different ways, because it's definitely meaningful. Everyone who came to join tonight, thank you so much. Glenn, thank you for being here. CT Sinclair, Sheep, Carrie Budd, thank you for the follow. Guys, if you are watching here and you like the topics, you're interested in games and health, please go over to YouTube /digital.com, digital.games, that's the name of the channel, and give a subscribe over there. It really, really helps a lot, and I hope to get to know you guys. If you want to join the Discord, exclamation point, I can't talk, it's time to end the stream, Discord in the chat, we'll get you there, and we'll see you next time. Again, Brooke and Matt, thanks so much, and game on, guys.